and I believe.
Chris Parkin, did you send the goat to New Pond Farm?
Did I send the goat to New Pond Farm? No.
Okay, so
Well,
we should be
only
live.
in
We
Easton
are
Reading.
Live on YouTube with that
Hi, we are
question.
live on YouTube now. Okay, very good. And it is. We'll call to order
I'm
this.
just wondering who sent it over.
This regular meeting of the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Policy Committee at 9:03 a.m. on May 14th, 2021. First item on our agenda is the approval of minutes. Actually, no, I'm sorry. We didn't have quorum last week, so there's no minutes. There are no minutes to approve. So the first item here will end up being public comment. No members of the public being present. We'll move to committee member comment.
My apologies, but I took last Friday off.
No, no worries.
That was me too. Sorry, I thought we were off,
No, not at all. Not at all.
and I was stuck in the quarantine it was a long
Right.
quarantine.
Understood.
Nothing like a close contact at the height of your
Mhm.
track season.
Yeah.
There's
All right, so we'll go to discussion and possible action. Under the heading of Cape Model Policy Review, sort of specific to the 9000 series in the Cape Model Policy, which governs bylaws of the boards, we'll continue our conversation as it relates to the sort of governing of the boards when we come together to collaborate. And so under this heading, we have been doing a number of projects in order to try to document the processes and sort of procedures that sort of affect the boards when we come together to do business as we oftentimes need to. I'm going to share my screen. The document that we've been using to draft our work here. So we sort of highlighted each one of the sort of main topics that we identified and have just been going through the process of providing sample language with the intent of presenting the sample language to the boards in a consolidated document. And we've been making good progress, I think, over the course of the last several weeks. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, and probably a number of items to go back and review and sort of validate that these are recommendations. And, if our intent is to try to bring these to discussion, at least in part, and I would suggest that we time box in our May 25th tri-board meeting, if say we want to spend 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour, or however long we determine makes sense on this topic with the tri-board, we will be trying to get through as many of these as possible and sort of getting agreement. And then, we may need to come back for the rest over time, but, start by starting. So, okay. So any questions, comments before we dive in and start talking about some of these remaining policies and procedures that we're looking to define?
Just trying to understand that we're leaving off when I was last at a meeting, or was there conversations and fill in nothing?
No, I don't believe we I think that last Friday we didn't meet or we didn't have quorum, so did not do any work on this last week.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Just trying to pick up where we left off, because it feels like it's been 3 months, but it's only been 2 weeks. Row 14, it looks like this is about, among other things, reopening the central office budget. So I think we need to kind of clarify what's meant by the sample language to the extent it talks about what happens when one or more boards wishes to or needs to go back to that question.
Yeah, and I think the intent here, I mean, I know it's a simple statement, and we may need to sort of clarify. I think the intent was to say, we think the appropriate practice is, if you need to take another look at it, if you need to sort of reopen the topic of the central office budget once it's already been approved by each of the boards, then you would do that at a joint meeting, so as to allow for discussion amongst the boards. So do we think we need sort of additional clarifying language here?
I guess it's a question of how detailed we want to get down the sort of process hole of, you know, if the budget can only be approved at a joint meeting, and hypothetically one board says, hey, you know, I need to find $50,000 out of this budget, we need to go back and have this conversation. But the other two boards say, no way, we're not even going to meet. What result?
I think the board can take unilateral action unless we're writing into each of our bylaws that we can be overwritten by the actions of the other boards, which I don't think that we're doing.
Well, this gets back into the question of whether the central office budget can be approved by the or a mechanism, and the extent to which that becomes binding.
I think that's correct. I think that's correct. And unless each of us are willing to write into our bylaws that it can be, that the will of the majority of a single board can be overwritten by that of the other boards, which I think would require us putting that into our bylaws. Unless we're willing to do that, then I think what we're saying here is anything that we put into these is a sort of a memorandum of understanding, not a binding policy.
I think that this is a conflict resolution question, which falls at the bottom, which is the central heart of our work, to be frank.
Right.
and yeah.
I mean, I know this seems strange, but it feels a little bit like actually changing the word must to should, strikes more of the right tone.
Agreed.
I mean, you could also say review and approval of the central office budget and any revisions there too must occur at a joint meeting. And I think when you get into dispute resolution, to sort of Maureen's point, there needs to be some language of good faith amongst the three boards to say, if somebody needs a meeting, we're going to hold a meeting, and we're not going to sort of pocket veto an action by refusing to meet.
Yes,
That's right.
Fully agree with that.
Where I like that language. Where do we put something like that? Is it, I mean, it's almost like we need a section here for calling joint meetings.
I think so.
I think you can have some very high level language that basically says that if the chairs of the three boards shall endeavor to work collaboratively at all times, and in the event any one board wishes to meet jointly, the three chairs shall work cooperatively to ensure that the meeting happens, reasonably promptly, or something to that effect.
The chairs of the three boards shall endeavor to work cooperatively.
Yes.
Yeah.
At all times. If I missed.
If any one or if any one board requests
any one board or any one chair?
I mean, I guess that you
authority are you vesting in the chair?
You could write chair because in theory, pursuant to the bylaws of any one board,
right,
a number of board members has the ability to call a meeting through the chair.
Right.
So if you played it to its natural conclusion, if any one board chair requests a meeting of the three boards, or a joint meeting of the three boards, really. The other chairs,
I'll do
absent
consideration.
Good cause shown, the other chairs will participate fully in said meeting, or
right,
something
and in
like
good
that.
faith, or whatever. Yeah.
Or do you even want that absence of good? Because do you want to provide an out?
All good faith efforts.
That's good. Yeah. All right.
Could be made to accommodate said request.
Sure.
I almost think you want to go further. I almost want to think you want us to mandate that if one board chair wants a meeting, you got to call the meeting. Because if it is of such an import, then you really need to get the discussion going on a broader basis. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
open to pushback on that,
Yeah,
but
I mean, I think it's totally fair that if you play to its natural conclusion, any one chair or 3 members of any one board
Right.
can force a tri-board meeting. I don't think is an awful rule.
no,
right?
I
Because
don't either.
there are circumstances where, you know, the performance, or there's,
Well, it's better than what would happen if that didn't occur, which is that a single board
That's right.
could say that they want to take action on a matter that concerns all 3 boards.
Right.
So convening the joint meeting seems to me it reflects an effort to work cooperatively.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's right. And the remedy to the board who can't get the other boards to show up is we get to act unilaterally because we tried.
right, you're never going to be able to get around the ability for an individual board or board members to say, okay, great, the meeting is scheduled, we're just not going to show up.
Right.
And
That's
there's
right.
no quorum and there's no action.
That's right.
And
Yeah. You're
Right.
not sending the sergeant of arms to to go pull people into the meeting.
maybe you're not. Maybe-
I mean, do we have a sergeant at arms?
We're looking for a parliamentarian. Can we deputize them as a sergeant of arms?
That's row 30. We're not there yet.
I'm gonna just highlight row 30 in red and make sure we never get to row 30. All right.
But, I mean, just having this conversation highlights just another area where there are sort of these norms that are
Right.
important to document so that nobody comes onto these boards feeling
Right. That's right. That
Left out.
there's no established norms. And we are proposing language that we hope makes sense and we hope that everyone agrees to, and that the boards will say, yes, this defines our norms. Understanding that, there's, without changes to each of the board's individual bylaws, these are sort of non-binding resolutions. Okay. All right. That's good. I think that's a really good addition.
Do you want to make that language more mandatory than permissive?
Cooperatively at all times, if one board chair requests a joint meeting of the 3 boards.
Do you want it more mandatory than all good faith efforts shall be made to accommodate? Do you want to mandate that if one chair calls the meeting shall occur? I'm asking, I'm not telling.
It seems the more we say must instead of should, there's this contrast between, well, that says that, but we're all recognizing these are norms, not official policies.
Okay.
So it just feels disingenuous to say you must do this. Because it's like you don't have to, but this is the norm. If we got to the point where everyone said, you know what, no, we want to codify these in our bylaws, and everybody wanted to do that, well, then I think we would switch these to.
I think the question becomes, what's the remedy for a chair that says, you know what, screw you, I'm not interested in having this meeting.
Right.
The question is also a little more subtle to me. When people look back at this document as a point of reference, they will hyper-focus on the language. And when they hyper-focus, will they hyper-focus as it is permissive or it's mandatory?
Yeah.
You might not necessarily need the must, but you may need language that feels more mandate, like a mandate or a requirement. So look, I'm not wedded to either idea. I just know that when people say, well, what should we do? When they look in the book.
I mean, you can say that the other chairs shall, consider and accommodate the request, but that gives a little bit too much.
Yeah.
That's even more permissive. I'm trying to find a mandate to the chairs to act in good faith that is close to,
If all good faith efforts must instead of should be made to accommodate said request.
That is a little bit more mandating, I think.
Yeah. And
Even though you don't like must, John.
yeah, I like it here because it's coming after the all good faith efforts. You
Okay.
know, meaning, because if it's, December 23rd and one board chair, one board says we meeting on the 25th. And it's like, look, we'll do what we can, but that's absurd.
Well, I don't think anything in here would mandate that the boards
Right.
bow to a date and time, but
Right.
more to this is an issue. And
Yeah.
so the additional restriction that you might consider is that the meeting needs to be held within 30 days or within 14 days or something like that.
That's true.
That's
Um,
good. All good faith efforts to convene the meeting within 14 days must be made to accommodate
Okay.
the request.
Something to that
like that.
effect, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be very few windows where 14 days is impossible,
Right.
particularly if it's of the sort of nature that we're considering here. That
The only issue with that is there could be something that is, time sensitive, needs, people need to get together in 3 days, and this language could actually give board chair or chairs the excuse to say like, oh, I know I only need to do it within 14 days. And it's like,
Hmm.
as soon as reasonably necessary, but in no event later than 14 days.
As soon as
Yep.
it's practicable.
good faith
I like
efforts
that.
to convene. Practical.
I mean, there's practical and there's reasonably necessary. And I think that
Right.
reasonably necessary allows you to say, the building is on fire, we need to meet tomorrow. Versus, I'm concerned that Taco Tuesday just isn't what it used to be. We can meet in 2 weeks.
And that the latter was the most important one, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
All good faith efforts to convene. So what was I'm sorry, the specific language instead of as
Reasonably necessary. Under the circumstances or something like.
That's good.
as soon as reasonably necessary and no event outside of 14 days. One board chair requests a joint meeting of the 3 boards.
But that reads that the efforts must be made within 14 days, and I don't think we want that, right?
Efforts must be made to accommodate said request to convene as soon as reasonably. So I just kind of swap those two.
That's saying that within 14 days, we'll consider your request, not that we'll schedule a meeting.
To satisfy the request. Right, because satisfying the request is actually scheduling the meeting, right?
To hold the meeting.
To hold
Yeah.
the meeting. To all good faith efforts must be made to hold said meeting as soon as reasonably necessary and in no event outside of 14 days.
Okay.
Good. All right. I think we could probably continue to bolt on language for a while. So we'll let that marinate. We have next Friday still. So, all right. Okay. Hiring of senior central office personnel. This one's easy.
Sarcasm noted.
The central office shall be directed to take all resumes, drop them down the staircase, and select the first one that lands at the bottom. The end.
Check.
The parliamentarian shall spin a wheel as to compensation.
Right. Right. All right. I want to find some low hanging fruit and get a win here.
Lease agreements.
Lease agreements.
That's the one. That's
Good.
the one.
Okay.
Now, when we say lease agreements, we're talking just about real estate and not about
Personal
copiers.
property.
Yeah, I don't know. Stephanie, you have thoughts?
Well, so lease agreements for the Xerox machine in central office
Right.
or lease agreements for central office.
Right. I think it's sort of,
It would be anything central office related, right?
but not the, I mean, we don't opine on the copier, right?
No, oh, you have in the past.
Oh, we've
You,
opined on the
courts.
copier, but
It was once suggested that we walk down the street to Samuel Staples to make copies. save
Walk down the street. That's not a good idea.
I
That's
mean,
a
I think
walk.
that the matter of substance here is
Yeah.
central office, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
actual place that,
Yeah.
where we work.
so we can say that any multi-year lease agreements with an aggregate value in excess of such and such is one way to cover some of this. Or you can just say lease agreements for
I mean, even a single year lease agreement of over a certain amount may warrant scrutiny.
or you can just limit it strictly to any lease agreements for commonly rented space.
Real property.
For real property.
Any real property lease agreements shall be approved by the boards, like sitting jointly.
Okay.
Yep.
And I might just take in C17 lease agreements and just say real property lease agreements or something, so that that doesn't spark the same conversation we just had.
Good. I think I think we're saying the same thing here.
What strategic goal setting and long-term planning is being approved by the boards as opposed to being discussed by the boards? I don't want to create an implied obligation to ratify things that are administrative prerogative.
Hmm.
And you might say no less than annually or something to that effect too. And I would also see some pushback about, does that mean that we can't talk about strategic goal setting by central office in individual meetings? I think the answer is probably no. I think you want to be encouraging that level of conversation frequently.
Then it feels a little bit like we're talking about some kind of joint committee, right? I mean, it sounds like what we're articulating here is that there's a group of people getting together, doing some work, reporting back to their respective boards. But then when it comes time to sort of dig in on.
Well, let me ask a different question. Is this intended to mean long-term planning with respect to the location and structure of central office, or with respect to the goals and objectives of central office administrators? Because they're very different conversations.
Yeah, I think more sort of the latter. I think of it less as a sort of operational discussion and more of a sort of strategic vision and, purpose discussion. But I may have been reading into this incorrectly.
Right. I think there's different value in both. I don't know the extent to which the strategic goals of central office administrators fits into the framework that we're talking about, which is really a governance and not sort of a planner. And I think that there's lots to be said for, it is our practice to have the central office administrators present their strategic goals for the year in the October tri-board meeting so that everybody's aware of what their overall priorities are for the year. That doesn't belong in this document.
I agree. I actually would remove this. Anyone object to that?
No.
Okie dokie. Superintendent evaluation.
Is it controversial to say that the chairs shall collaborate on a joint template for conducting the annual evaluation superintendent, but the three boards shall individually evaluate the superintendent in their own meetings?
I hope that's not
Controversial.
right.
I mean, it may be, because this is sort of a sensitive issue, but I think that it's important that we at least be measuring similar indicators, even if we might come to different results.
Other people heard that, right?
Yes.
What?
Okay, good. Yeah, that. Yeah. Chair shall collaborate to determine each board. However,
I don't like the however for
Yeah.
lots of reasons. Just
Yeah,
take
what-
out the however and start a new sentence.
each board shall be responsible for completing its evaluation process.
Shall conduct its own independent evaluation.
Independent evaluation should be fine.
Is there
One, two
anything?
independent sentences, not one dependent on the other in any way.
Yep. Each board shall conduct its own independent evaluation. Boards are encouraged but not required to share the results of their evaluations with
I
each
wouldn't
other.
even say that.
Yeah.
You get into really sticky personnel questions about whether or not somebody working for one employer can share their evaluation of an
Yeah.
employee to another employer without everybody's consent. It gets really messy really fast.
Okay. Discipline and discharge. I don't know why this also says delegating and not
Right, yeah,
delegating.
why?
I don't know.
It's code.
It's a gremlin broke into the sheet and typed that. I don't know.
I assume this is with respect to which of these functions the board has fully delegated to administration and which it's reserved to itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's to a certain extent a matter of existing policy in the personnel section in the 4000s somewhere
Mhm.
that broadly says the superintendent shall conduct the processes for hiring and firing and everything else
Right.
for everybody below the rank of superintendent.
Right. Aren't we only talking about the superintendent here?
That's one of the $64,000 questions.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I'm partially inclined to pull up
4,000.
the existing policy, but I don't know what value the existing policy has in a world where
Right.
there are differently held beliefs about what the
Yeah.
appropriate role is. And if we're going to redefine the collective understanding, we might as well just define what the collective understanding is within the scope of what's permissible.
Right.
You know, the only guardrails at this point are the extent to which there are rules around certified staff and the extent to which there are different rules around non-certified staff.
Mhm. I'm highlighting the ones that we maybe are punting on in the interest of
Only
making-
temporarily.
temporarily.
We got to get there eventually.
Right. Procedural, adding agenda items, recessing, executive session, tabling motions, and adjournments. Could we say procedural motions such as, such as blah, 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 blah.
Shall be covered by Robert's rules, shall be referred to the bylaws, shall be, I guess that's a form of punting, but otherwise you have a lot of writing to do here.
Do we have, we should evaluate each of our bylaws to determine if we have a similar process, because if we do, then I think that actually works really well.
A similar process for what?
Adding agenda items
for
Taking
each one of these
recess.
each of these procedural items. If you yep.
I believe the FOI Act governs agenda items, and that's that at a regular meeting, an agenda item could be added by a 2/3 majority vote of the board. And so that would trump whatever the bylaws say, unless the bylaws are more restrictive.
Right.
So let's
FOI
just say
also
that then.
determines executive session. Right. But
Right.
when we're meeting jointly, we're 3 separate boards. So this is actually a conflict resolution problem.
Right.
Right.
Right. Ultimately, it is. The question is, should the boards be tabling motions on an aggregate majority or on 3 individual majorities?
Which suggests to me that when we have here the resolution of issues, we simply refer to procedural items. This is actually, we have it under resolution of issues, but I think it's really sort of which process would we recommend, if any, and then we just put these items in the notes.
Right. It's the resolution flow chart, basically.
That's right. That's right.
Am I dealing with a procedural issue? Am I dealing with a substantive issue?
That's right. Yeah, these are actually not. These are not things that are in this list, except as referenced by.
They're in the next column.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna highlight these in green. Let's see.
I believe all 3 boards probably have the same policy 9325 from 1997 that reads, the current edition of Robert's rules shall govern the proceedings of the board except when in conflict with board policy, which is sort of the catch-all procedural bylaw.
Right. Okay. So, this is the meatiest of all meaty topics here. That's interesting. I don't even remember us adding this option, but it's actually a very interesting option.
That's the ER9 committee of the whole.
Is it? Oh, okay. I thought it was. Oh, I see what you're saying. The committee of the whole, right. So all members now within the bounds of that committee of the whole, we are voting and having conversations and making recommendations in a sort of simple majority. Or we could define that committee of the whole has to have a supermajority or any of the other mechanisms here.
Right.
But ultimately, it's still simply that committee of the whole is making a recommendation back to each of the respective boards.
It would allow you to say that a quote unquote tri-board meeting is noticed simultaneous to a committee of the whole meeting. The committee of the whole meeting is conducted as a meeting of 21 people that works through all the substantive agenda items and passes on recommendations by a majority vote, whereupon the tri-board meeting then takes action upon the recommendation.
Right.
It at least allows you to work through the discussion in a way that is not
clunky. But ultimately, any one board, all boards retain their autonomy and the ability to say, thank you for your recommendation, committee. We reject it.
Right. It creates an additional layer of process, but it theoretically streamlines the substantive discussion so that it's not spending 15 minutes getting 6 motions on the table.
Right. Yeah. It also, I think, allows for an individual who says, I individually am against this, but but can allow myself to vote as a board member for my individual board for this based on the work that was done within that sort of larger meeting.
I think this would be a very difficult thing to socialize.
I think it will sound very complex to people, but it's sort of been a theme recently, sort of complex ideas and sort of summarizing them for people in a way that it's just like, I understand the purpose. I understand exactly how that would work, and I see the value. It feels like this is actually the most promising solution that I see here. Because frankly, each one of the options, whether it's simple majority, supermajority, or the mechanism, requires the boards to make changes to their bylaws. Otherwise, the boards are acting in conflict to their bylaws.
Recess and reconvene is not, that's not that.
Right.
You know.
Agreed. Agreed.
I was thinking that for resolution of issues that you really kind of need to decide a point in time at which you will regard the board as deadlocked boards. And
like that.
if you decide how that happens, that might give rise to what the answer is. For example, when we get into meetings and it's 11 o'clock at night and we're spinning collectively and people are tired, recess and reconvene is usually the way to go, because clear heads might prevail when everyone has not been ruminating on something in a public forum for 4 hours.
Right.
So I think if we get to a point where it feels like the discussion has gone on, and I don't know how to define that except by time, recess and reconvene is kind of the first default for me, because it's been my experience, and I haven't been doing this for very long, but it's been my experience that cooler heads generally prevail when you get away from a 4-hour meeting.
Yeah.
And so if you default to that and you come back, as burdensome as it may seem that you can't make the decision then, you get a decision.
Yeah. I agree with that. And the thing that has stuck for me since it kind of clicked in my brain about sort of individual board bylaws, this mechanism and this, this technique and this process option are respect the individual board bylaws. And I think that's important. I think that's really important. I frankly think that these three options, when they have been invoked in the past, have been invoked improperly. So
I still think that we are not getting past the natural tension that exists between when we can make decisions severally and when we make them jointly. And I don't know how to get there because.
Right. Well, because it always comes back to good faith efforts, and it always comes back to one board can always just walk away. And it's always going to circle back to that.
Right.
And, also that if there's something that is so deeply unpopular with, one board, it's probably not, even if it does get forced through, it's not a great situation that you're going to end up with.
Right. Yeah. So, it's like sort of additional creativity needs to be applied there until you figure out the solution that everybody's on side.
And the recess and reconvene is, probably in that situation, the best way to get there, because as Maureen said, everybody's exhausted and probably not in the best mood, and there's resentments, and, you give it 48 hours for people to think about stuff and then come back to it.
Then they come back to the idea and not the personal dynamics that develop in the context of the conversation.
Come to a better solution than you would if you're, voting something in over people's head.
And sleeping on it. There's a lot to be said for sleeping on
it. There's also is similar on sort of a macro scale to the concept at the individual board level of once an issue has been settled, you may be on the winning side of a vote or the losing side of a vote, but it is now the board's view or the board's position that fill in the blank. And I think some board members do better with that than others with respect to, okay, the issue is done. Now this is what the board believes, and we just need to move on with that as the substance. And when you talk
state
about
that in rights and roles and responsibilities, can you state two things explicitly? One, you have an obligation as a board member to support a decision made by the whole. And can you also state that you as a board member can make a decision based on what you think the collective interest of the district is, apart from what your personal beliefs are? I think if you call that out, you give people sort of freedom to say, hey, personally, I think we shouldn't serve French fries in the cafeteria. There's such a demand for them that maybe we need to serve French fries.
I don't know. I find that troubling. I find that troubling.
Okay.
I mean, the degree to which anyone would be compelled to advocate for something that they don't believe in, like, I'm not interested in that at all.
I mean, as a point of example, in recent years, I have voted against the budget that ultimately came out of my board. I then had no problem saying this is the board's budget, and I'm fully behind the board's budget because it is the board's budget.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then saying this is the budget that I believed in, this is the budget that I wanted. Like, I mean, we would never want to be in a position where we're saying, no, you have to say this is what you wanted. But to say this is the board's position, that is accurate. Yeah.
But you can also say, I voted, there's a policy before the board to make, French fries mandatory 5 days a week, and it passes, but I voted against it. I can't then go to our board of selectmen and say, my God, I was against this French fry thing. I still think it's a bad idea. That's just bad form.
It is bad form, but it's not gracious, but I think you can do it. Like, I think you absolutely have a right to do that. And sort of anything we put in writing that says you can't, just kind of says, hey, muffle yourself. And,
Right.
I'm not trying to do that. I don't think. I'm just trying to give people different ways of thinking about things.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? I'm not saying you must. You can vote your individual interest. I'm just trying to say both what we've been saying, which is stand behind a decision of the board, period, once it's made. And don't go back and revisit it. But I'm also trying to say the way you can think about things as a board member can be beyond what your personal belief system is. And you don't have to necessarily advocate for it, but it's okay to vote for the French fry resolution, even if you hate French fries, Because
being a board member is not about being, you personally, weighing in on what you personally think all the time.
Right.
You are there to represent the interests of the district, which are not always going to be on all fours with your own personal interests.
Right. And you can just begin to envision that the interests of the district might not be coextensive with your own.
Yes. And I imagine three different perspectives. I am for this thing. I'm against this thing. I'm indifferent to this thing. And it's really easy for me to say, I'm for this thing that passed, and I'm indifferent to this thing that passed, and sort of, but if I'm actively against something, believe deeply against some action, I think it is useful for us to say, it's in bad form, or sort of give some guidance about sort of the gracious way to conduct yourself. But I worry about anything that smacks of say something that you don't believe or anything. And I know that's not what you're suggesting.
And
I want to be sensitive to that.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying to say to a board member, hey, John, I know you hate French fries, but have you thought about X and Y and Z? And can you support French fries because it's beyond, the fact that you hate them?
Yeah.
I observe often that people default to what they believe when they make decisions.
Sure.
As opposed to what a collective interest might be. And I just want to give people, I guess, the freedom to say, think about this differently. Don't take yourself completely out of the equation, but think about this differently. I mean,
I think part of this is
the example of Pam Goodpaster is the one that comes to mind, and I won't go any further into that than that, but that's one of the ones that was a little bit questionable in that regard, and you really had to think about a broader interest.
And I think that Maureen and I have the benefit of representing other people's interests every single day, and taking ourselves out of our sort of personal worldview and putting ourselves into somebody else's, and so that it's a more natural framework.
Yep. Okay. So are we, it feels a little bit like we're settling on, we actually wouldn't recommend any of these three. and that our default is we believe the right answer, once we've reached an impasse, once we've determined that an impasse, that we're at an impasse, we say recess and reconvene.
So
At least
let's
once.
Yeah.
right. Let's play it forward, and let's say it's January of 2022, and the central office budget request is $3 million, and we fight about it for 4 hours, and there's no resolution. Okay, we invoke the recess and reconvene option. We're going to come back next week, and we're going to have this conversation again. We come back next week, and half the board's members are dead set against it, and half the board members are dead set for it. Now what?
Well, before we get there, do we have a position on aggressive lobbying of people from other people on other boards?
Yeah,
When-
it's a
Email
really good
a
question.
member of another board and demand that they take an action because it's their civic responsibility to agree with you. Do we?
Yeah.
Are we okay
Yeah.
with that? Comportment.
It would
As long as it's
be
framed that way. That's
right. I mean, it would
I've
be
gotten them.
it would be a violation of FOIA for me or any other member of my board to lobby the other members of my board outside of a party caucus, for instance, right?
not.
But what about
not
members of the
totally
different?
true, but
I'm sorry, a quorum, right?
Right.
Whether in a serial session or all together outside of a party caucus, you're not
you
allowed.
can't hold a seriatim meeting for the purpose of imposing your will. Right.
Right. Whether you're just hitting people one at a time or you're collecting a bunch of people together. If you do that with more than a quorum of your board, you're in violation of FOIA.
With less than a quorum.
But there's no there's no restriction under FOI to say that I can't go serially to every member of the Easton board and lobby them.
Exactly.
And
That's a little I did not know that was done. It's dawning on me now, like, well, especially with our 3 boards, that's a pretty big loophole. Hey, Chris, you go talk to mine and I go talk to your, like,
right.
what?
We'll just switch.
No, that's wrong.
No, and I'm not whining here, but I have had that happen to me by an aggressive member of the Easton board and an aggressive member of the Reading board, and it's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it certainly doesn't promote what we're trying to get to. When you get an email saying, you're not doing your civic duty, you're as a taxpayer and a whatever, you need to do this and you need to do it today. Excuse me?
Yeah, preferably yesterday.
Right. I mean, you need to vote a certain way. And, so I don't know. I don't know if that needs to be addressed, whatever. I have a delete button and I also can respond.
I mean, the functional question then becomes, to the extent there's sort of 2 threads here. Like, let's say the Region 9 board is considering something that is exclusive to Region 9. They're going to cancel the prom. And the question then becomes, to what extent do Eastern and Reading board members have the ability to okay, hey, Gwen, you really need to do this. It's your civic duty. I think they're acting as members of the public at that point.
Right. That's right.
To the extent that it is an issue of, we really need to do something about the central office budget. Now they're effectively acting as board members, but arguably also as members of the public, lobbying as taxpayers. Like, it's awfully goofy. I mean, we get lobbied by members of the public all the time to do all sorts of stupid things.
Absolutely. No, I'm the instances I'm discussing, one involves a personnel hire, and one involved disposition of unspent funds. So, and those, people had strong opinions of how the unspent funds should be disposed of, and people had strong opinions about a hire recently, and so those were matters that the 3 boards were considering jointly. So it wasn't a situation where it was a member of the public type of situation.
Right.
Folks, I have to tell you that precisely at 1 minute of 10, I have to.
Yeah. See now, and this doesn't fix it, I think, but there is an interesting if for instance we were talking about formation of a joint committee as we're discussing these issues, but you'd only be limited to less than a quorum, right?
Huh? I'm confused.
If let's say that we joined a committee of the whole of all the boards, 21 members, you could go talk to 10 members.
Yeah.
So
in theory,
right.
I mean, there's nothing to stop you from writing more restrictive rules either.
Right.
And you might specifically put in here that it is the expectation that members of the boards do not take the recess and reconvene period to, abuse colleagues and other boards.
Yeah, I worry about recess and reconvene will look like lobby.
Well, because
lobby the other boards.
Back in the day, the recess and reconvene was we're sitting in the library at Joe Barlow. The chair calls a recess. Everybody caucuses, breaks FOI, and argues with each other in the corners in plain public view, and comes back and has resolved the thing in private.
What?
That's how it used to. That's the mechanism between votes 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 was let's go to our separate corners. And if you look at the minutes, it was people caucused, came back and said this, and they didn't mean FOI permissible caucuses.
Yeah, they didn't mean caucus, a party caucus.
They meant a couple folks from Easton and a couple folks from Region 9, a couple folks from Reading got in a corner, worked it all out, and came back to the table.
Well, but that is allowable if it's members of different boards in less than quorums.
Right,
but it feels very loopholey.
It's ugly from a transparency perspective.
Right. Okay.
I mean, you can put in a trigger of some sort that says that the boards agree that on a central office budget that there's an automatic CPI increase or something if there's no agreement. But that's a whole different controversy.
Right. And again, I think that would need to be in each of our individual bylaws.
Right.
Right. Or we could put it in as, sort of common practice, allowing for, it may be sometimes that it's politically harrowing to vote for an increase of any amount. And if we built in some CPI increase, that might allow somebody who's making a political calculation to say, it's out of my hands. That's the allowed practice.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think there's something to be said generally, and this doesn't really hit this, to talk about how there should be a per se expectation that the central office budget, incorporates certain inflation metrics on an annual basis and certain cost of living increases. And so, you're not litigating that delta every year.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Mm.
Because that also sets a pattern and practice for the budget when it comes back to the boards. It's already built in. This is our CPI increase, and this is what we've done with it. So in a way, it does promote way more transparency.
Mm-hmm.
You've told us we can have 2% every year. Here's the 2%. Here's how we've applied it. In addition, we'd like another $75,000 to do X. Okay, let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Do we want to build that here? And again, as guidance or best practice.
I don't want to create a lightning rod in this document on that. I would.
Do you
I would
think
be in
that
favor.
would be a lightning rod, Chris?
Oh yes,
It might be.
Okay.
Particularly because I think there are strong opinions about the extent to which that would allow compensation decisions to be made by the administration outside of the scope of the control of the negotiating committee and other things that I don't think.
Okay. Okay.
But I do think that that's a conversation that we ought to have in October when we have the pre-budgetary conversation about central office budget and say, hey, can we all get around the idea of stipulating to a CPI increase every year and start this year with that as a
practice
and reflect that in the budget?
Yeah, I think that's right. Is a good part of the process. So I'm trying to be mindful of the time. I think here's a good place to pause. I think so. I don't know that we have to have every box filled out for our conversation on the 25th. But if we're meeting next Friday, if people are able to sort of think about these specific boxes, so essentially the hiring, approval of salary and benefits, and the process for resolution of issues,
Did you share this doc, John? You did, right? Or did you?
If I didn't, I will.
Okay.
So people can make sure to be able to refer to it as they're considering.
Thank you.
So I know we have 3 minutes, and which really means we have 2 minutes. Stephanie, is there anything from an administrative update perspective that's urgent?
There's nothing urgent.
Okay, thank you. So
Anything urgent that we can cover in 90 seconds.
right. Anything really important that we should have devoted half the meeting to? Wonderful.
I really want to know about this reference that you had at the beginning of the meeting, Glenn, right? The farm, like what's going on?
Oh, so hold on.
There's a sign going around town.
Let's wait. So
I'm going to move to adjourn.
yes. Wait. No public being present. We'll move on to committee member comment. Any committee member comment? Very good. Do I have a motion? I heard a motion to adjourn.
Motion to
from Chris.
adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Gwen.